President Biden's support among Arab Americans is on life support. A new poll out of Michigan finds that the commander-in-chief is actually trailing behind RFK Jr. when it comes to this polling block. Only 16% of Democratic respondents said they would vote for Biden if the election were held today. 82% of Michigan Democratic Arab and Muslim voters view Biden unfavorably, and 71% of Michigan DEMS do support a ceasefire.
Hundreds of Muslim and Arab voters took to the state's capital this week to call for an end to U.S. military support to Israel. Per reporting from the ground, the indictment of Biden was totally clear. You can see in those images signs like Genocide Joe. Almost every speaker spoke about electorally punishing Democrats next year, which is a big deal. This is a key constituency in that state. I'm from that state, obviously. It's not. I don't think it's so much a matter of them suddenly becoming Republicans, but if they stay home or if they have interest in RFK Jr., Michigan is one of those swing states. Trump won it in 2016. It was key to his surprise victory there. This does sound like very bad news and should be affecting the calculus of what Biden's policy is with respect to the Israel-Hamas war. Again, you and I have different views on the conflict, but where we agree is there's no reason to keep tacitly endorsing what is going on there by sending weapons and pledging unlimited support.
Yeah, the reality is that Biden's margin of error, margin of victory, rather, in Michigan, is smaller than the number of Arab voters in the state of Michigan. So absent resourcing voters from some other demographic, which, by the way, Biden is not doing so well in other demographics. He's down with Latinos. He's down with Black Americans. Older whites are the only demographic where he's been relatively strong. And I'm not quite sure how that cuts with respect to his relationship with all of the union organizing that's been going on in the state as well. But putting that to the side, this is obviously a crisis point for him. This is a constituency group that can make or break the election. And knowing that's true and seeing how the party is choosing to respond is pretty remarkable. Although it's gotten some pushback, and we'll talk about that in a second, from folks like Tulsi Gabbard, what it has done to try to shore up its credibility with the Muslim community seems to just be this task force headed by Kamala Harris that seems mostly performative, mostly kind of a superficial gesture to say Islamophobia is bad. Islamophobia is bad. I'm not sure that that's what the Arab voters that went from supporting Biden at 58% in 2020 to 16% today are concerned about.
Yeah, I worry the task force is actively menacing to people's free speech rights. Again, the government has no right to crack down on Islamophobia or hate speech. Islamophobia is bad, and people should speak out against it, and they should speak out against anti-Semitism and racism and bigotry and all the rest of it. But it is not illegal to hold those views or to express those views, and the government is just terrible at telling legal speech from illegal speech. And
it's just missing the point. Those Arab American voters are upset because 10,000 people have been killed in 3 weeks, in a month of bombing in Gaza. Because they're losing family members and loved ones because they're being bombed in Gaza. Because they feel like America isn't just a passive witness to that kind of a tragedy, but the President of the United States of America flew across the country to wrap his arms around before this moment, an already right-wing leader who has been the subject of ire from his own community, to say that Israel has his unqualified support as they disproportionately exact revenge for the horrific events of October 7th. That's the fundamental issue, and I don't think any kind of anti-free speech task force is going to get to the bottom of that. But as paltry as Biden's response to Arab American concerns have seemed to Arab Americans, they are being characterized as an overreach and evidence of indifference to the interest of Jewish Americans and Jewish people in the diaspora by some people in the political community, namely Tulsi Gabbard. Let's roll this clip of what she had to say about it.
This is one of the main reasons, Sean, that I left the Democrat Party. It is clear, and it has been for some time, that they don't care about the safety, security, or freedom of the American people, and they have become apologists for these Islamist jihadists. And Sean, I got to tell you, for those like me, the many Americans like me who enlisted in the military because of the 9/11 jihadist terrorist attack on us. This is incredibly offensive. You know, I've deployed 3 times to war zones in the Middle East and in Africa. I know how serious this threat of Islamist jihadism is. The Democrat elite, they don't care. They don't care. They leave our borders wide open, which we know are being exploited by these Islamist terrorists. And they redirect our security infrastructure, our assets, our intel assets, not towards focusing on these terror threats that are coming through our borders and elsewhere. They're focusing them on fellow Americans. They're focusing.
What do you make of this turn?
Well, I mean, I also think Islamic jihad is a serious threat, and we'd have to protect our country. Honestly, I think part of the problem is that we have redirected resources. Yes, for surveilling on Americans, it's very bad. I'm all against it. But also, we've just gotten overly involved in other nations' wars, and it's not good for us. I don't know what. Tulsi in the past has been a voice in some cases for less interventionist, or at least less nation building. So I don't know if this is if she's articulating a different stance here, or what her views are on funding the Israel-Hamas conflict. My bottom line is I just don't think our U.S. security is enhanced. I don't think it's an America first policy to be overly concerned with what's going on there and overly involved, the way the Biden administration clearly is, and the way many Republicans, to be abundantly clear, also feel about the conflict, that there's nothing more important than the U.S. being heavily involved in Israel's security and restructuring of the Gaza Strip. I say I don't think Americans actually take a lot of interest in that, or are their interests best served by their tax dollars, paying for, paying for death and destruction in an unending conflict that has lasted for hundreds of years.
What's interesting is that there are a number of people kind of on the left, kind of independent left, who have been willing to give Tulsi a lot of credit over the years for being a relatively more anti-war voice, as they put it. And I've seen all of those people defect from her as she uncritically kind of cheers on the siege of Gaza. Nico House, who I believe used to work for at least one of her campaigns, tweeted, "At this point, Tulsi is coming off more anti-Muslim than pro-Israel." Danny Haifong, another person who at times credited, a journalist who at times credited Tulsi Gabbard, tweeted, "At times beginning in 2015, 2016, I defended Tulsi Gabbard for taking, albeit selectively, an anti-interventionist stand on Syria and other wars. I was wrong. Gabbard is a monstrous opportunist and hypocrite. History won't remember her fondly." Lee Camp, another anti-war advocate, and journalist, says Tulsi Gabbard fooled many people into thinking she was anti-war. In fact, she supports most wars that don't harm U.S. troops. She doesn't care about humanity. She doesn't care about innocent children, blah, 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 blah. I have not seen this kind of quadrant of the left be as critical as someone who is living in that kind of liminal left-right anti-war space as I have been seeing in this moment. And I think it's particularly because, the signs were on the wall. Apparently, she was very enthusiastic about the siege back in 2014 of Gaza as well. But this does seem to be a mask-off moment for many figures. Well, we've talked about it a little bit with respect to RFK Jr., and we'll talk about it more later in the show. But for so many people, this particular conflict is exposing whether or not they're holistically anti-war and anti-interventionist, or only when it is, less core to
I will say, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, people on the left seem very hard to please and seem very eager to find reasons to dislike or not get along is something I've noticed. So it actually doesn't surprise me to see people who were once in good standing on these issues being tossed out. And not to agree necessarily with what Tulsi's saying about, I guess, the Democratic Party at large, but I have been taken aback at the level of support for and endorsement of Hamas's actions on October 7th by not the Democratic Party formally, but by activists on the Palestinian issue on college campuses and elsewhere. And maybe that's what has turned her off.
Well, she did say that she is offended by how I left the Democrats Party because they support Hamas. And it's fascinating, the kind of allegiance and commitment to unithink that some of these so-called free speakers want. Literally every single member of Congress, except for 9 Democrats in the House, voted for a purely performative resolution to say we're going to back Israel no matter what. The entire American Congress pledged allegiance to a foreign nation. Only 9 Democrats had the courage to stand up and say, we have our own country.
And 1 Republican.
We have our own. No, this particular resolution, there were a couple of bills like this. I think this one was just the one that the 9 Democrats in the House said,
Massey voted against that one too, I think, but that doesn't matter.
Had the courage to come up and say no. And for her, someone who we really, I think, appreciated for having the ability and the courage to stand up against the Democratic Party and be the only member of Congress to endorse Bernie Sanders back in 2016, someone who used to respect sticking your neck out for something that you believed in, is now saying the whole of the Democratic Party is bad because of the paucity of Democratic Party members who actually were willing to show courage in that moment. I think that is why people have turned on Tulsi, because they are people of principle who are identifying that someone that they thought was similarly of principle is not that anymore.
The left is mad at Bernie too.
Yeah, because he similarly abandoned his principles. If you don't have any, it's really easy to get along with everybody.
All right, more Rising right after this.